movies of horror. This week is F for Flesh. From the picture, but you can guess who we gotta talk about today. Quote, only a real artist knows the actual anatomy of the terrible or the physiology of fear, the exact sort of lines and proportions that connect up with latent instincts or hereditary memories of fright, and the proper color contrast and lighting effects to serve the dormant sense of strangeness. From Pickman's Model by H.P. Lovecraft. Alien. UK 1979, director Ridley Scott, with Tom Skerritt, Sigourney Weaver, John Hurt, Ian Holm, Veronica Cartwright, Harry Dean Stanton, 20th Century Fox. Color. Scripted by Dan O'Bannon, Alien basically takes the plots of several old science fiction movies, The Terror from Beyond Space, 1958, Planet of the Vampires, 1965, etc., and wraps them in a surface gloss thanks to director Scott's incredibly detailed visual sense. The 7 crew members of the commercial spacecraft Nostromo are awakened from a long-term sleep in order to investigate signals from a nearby planetoid. Once on the surface, they discover the wreck of an alien spaceship, and upon returning to their own craft, unknowingly bring on board a very deadly life form. H.R. Geiger's much-anticipated alien designs are genuinely bizarre, and there is a pounding soundtrack and excellent Oscar-winning special effects. Major sequences were cut before release, and some of the shock moments were slightly trimmed after previews. Hurt replaced John Finch when the latter was taken ill during filming. Sequels: Aliens, director James Cameron, 1986. Alien 3, director David Fincher, 1992. Opposite, H.R. Geiger. In the pantheon of horror movies, no collection would be complete without the alien. This extraordinary creature and the world it inhabits are the creation of an artist who produces landscapes every bit as memorable as Bosch or Bruegel, walking dream territories of sinuous and liquid and things with teeth. Wandering through them, you know exactly where you are, and in that place where no one hears you scream. Swiss surrealist H.R. Geiger is still perhaps best known for his book H.R. Geiger's Necronomicon, a collection of early paintings loosely inspired by the work of H.P. Lovecraft and his designs for Ridley Scott's classic 1979 science fiction horror film Alien. Geiger was originally only asked to create the 3 phases of the film's alien monster, the facehugger, the chestburster, and the big alien. But he also ended up designing the surface of the planetoid, the exterior and interior of the derelict spacecraft, and its dead pilot, the space jockey. The original design called for a much bigger facehugger, which would use its muscular tail to spring out of one of the alien eggs. Geiger describes them as organic footballs and attach itself to the face of Cain, played by actor John Hurt. But director Ridley Scott wanted something smaller, so Geiger called upon his artistic training. At school, I worked as an industrial engineer, so everything must have a function, he recalls. The facehugger was determined through its function. You have to show that. I was thinking that something that jumps out and then holds onto someone's face needs fingers or hands. Normally, if someone is sitting on your face, you can't breathe through your nose, so you automatically open your mouth. Then the monster goes down. So it looked a little like a crab or a spider. I like long fingers, so it had these long fingers, then 2 hands and a spiral tail. That was it. The hands hold onto Cain's face and the tail wraps around its neck. Although his chestburster was put together by a team of technicians, Geiger sculpted and constructed the facehugger and the big alien himself. The alien is the star of the movie, he maintains. As I do with all my work, I made the creature look biomechanical. Starting with the plaster core, I worked with plasticine, rubber, bones, ribbed tubes, and different mechanical stuff like wires. Ridley Scott gave me a lot of freedom. He and I would discuss the story and sometimes use my book as a guide, and then I knew where I had to go. If you make a horror movie, then the monster must convince people. Mostly it doesn't. Only the head of the alien was good. For me, it was my first big film, and I was not very familiar with these things. I learned a lot. Since his Oscar-winning involvement with Alien, his distinctive biomechanical imagery has influenced numerous movies and TV shows, and Geiger is not always flattered by these uncredited imitations. There are a lot of American filmmakers who copy my work, he says. I'm not being compensated, and my name is never mentioned. If at least that would happen, then I would be content with the thought of having inspired something. For me, most horror films are too stupid and too boring and too badly made. I like films that are a little different. You create something horrible, but if it's filmed badly, then it doesn't create any emotion in people. Geiger's first involvement with movies came in 1969 when he created an extraterrestrial dog and humanoid alien for FM Mirror's 45-minute short entitled Swiss Maid, filmed in 35mm. 2 years later, he co-directed Passagen, aka Passages, as an experiment in documentary filmmaking. However, his dealings with Hollywood have been mostly frustrating experiences for the artist. We have no special effects artists for the film industry in Switzerland. One must be a dedicated fanatic, and I seem to be the only one in the kind here who is working with the Hollywood film industry. That makes me quite critical and sometimes a bit sour. The problem is to find someone who can realize my designs exactly as I intended, he laments. I've never been satisfied with what filmmakers have done with my work in the past. After the 2 versions of Dune he worked on, for Alejandro Jodorowsky in 1975 and Ridley Scott in 1979, were abandoned, other projects such as The Tourist, 1982, and The Mirror and Dead Star, both from director Bill Malone, also never made it to the screen. In 1985, Geiger was commissioned by MGM to create various horror scenes for the film Poltergeist 2: The Other Side, 1986, with director Brian Gibson, who had previously invited him to work on The Tourist. However, Geiger was less than happy with the visual transformations of his ideas. I got mixed up with the wrong project, he reveals. The producers gave me the impression that I would be able to create something really new for this film, and the script would be adjusted if need be. Unfortunately, things went differently. In 1987, he was commissioned by Japanese director Akio Jitsujo to create the monster Goho Doji for Tokyo, the Last Megalopolis, and more recently he designed Syl, the shape-changing alien hybrid for Species, 1995. Quote, in mapping the tribal lands of our psyches, Geiger gives us fresh access to them. He frees us, in essence, to wander there, encouraged by the fact that others have gone before. He makes us brave, and I can think of few higher ambitions for any art. Clive Barker. Quote, Geiger's work disturbs us, spooks us because of its enormous evolutionary time span. It shows us all too clearly where we come from and where we are going. Timothy Leary. Would not expect a Timothy Leary quote in there. We got Alien, some work, Facehugger, and then Poltergeist 2. Geiger's efforts on this movie were just enormous, explains Frank Mancuso Jr., producer of Species. Way above and beyond any issue of money, I expect, in fact, that he may have lost money on this project, given the time and care he lavished on it. We talked for hours on the phone and the most minute details of the design. He approached this project as an artist. He really gave it his all. However, after seeing the finished film, the artist's reaction was somewhat muted. Sometimes I ask myself why they used me on this film instead of someone else. Because there are so many excellent film designers, I became so excited about a project that I lose my ability to make good business decisions and give far more than I am paid for. What is important is the final quality of my work and how it is presented. Nobody ever asks after the years have passed how much I got paid or whether I actually paid half of the cost for a particular sequence. Hans Rudi Geiger was born in Switzerland in 1940. When he was 5 years old, Geiger's mother was given a copy of Life magazine by an American soldier staying at their holiday home. Inside the magazine, Geiger found a photo spread of Jean Cocteau's magical film La Belle et la Bête, 1946. I liked Cocteau, he explains, because that was a man who did a lot of different things, just like I like to do. At the age of 18, Geiger was employed as a draftsman by an architectural firm where he developed his skills in composition and symmetry. From 1962 to 66, he attended the School of Applied Arts in Zurich, where he studied architectural and industrial design. The year that he graduated, he met actress Lee Tobler, and the couple carried on an often turbulent love affair until her suicide in 1975. Lee and I lived as lovers right up to her death, he recalls. As an actress, she adored anything unusual and loathed every form of mediocrity. It bored her to tears. When she finally left the theater, she opened her own art gallery in 1974. Her life was short but intense in every way, and her uniqueness stayed imprinted in the mind of everyone who ever met her. Tobler's influence on the artist is apparent in a series of paintings he named after her. In 1973, as Geiger's international reputation began to grow, he was commissioned to design a record sleeve for the rock group Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Since then, he has designed the pre-tel for the Swiss TV channel DRS in Japan, Sony launched his first Laserdisc in 1986 with cover motifs by Geiger. Books by Aleister Crowley, H.P. Lovecraft, and Timothy Leary were published in slipcases with Geiger motifs in 1988. And the same year, a Geiger bar was built in Tokyo, with another following in his hometown of Schur, Switzerland in 1992. Numerous art books and prints of his works are available worldwide. Many of Geiger's early drawings were done in India ink on tracing paper. In the late 1960s, he experimented briefly with oils, but found the medium too time-consuming and turned to the airbrush technique in 1971. Ridley Scott said that what he liked about my work was not the fantasy of it, it was the reality, explains the artist. The airbrush was very new for me then, and only a few people in Switzerland were using it. With the airbrush, you can create a kind of reality because it comes very close to the photographic eye. However, these days, he once again prefers to work in ink. After 20 years, I have done enough airbrush. I changed because of the fax machine. Now I do a sketch and pencil, then ink, because it comes out better on the fax, and in the movie business, time is the most important thing. After you have a meeting, they need a painting they can work with. If you have to first create a painting with an airbrush, then take it to a photographer, then send a transparency over. It takes several days. If you can do it right away on paper and fax it through, they have it immediately. Quote, he isn't trying to quell our jangled sensibilities, nor is he trying to lull us with resentments of this naturalistic status quo. For Pete's sake, just look at what he shows us. Look at the iconic choices he makes. He gives us elements of the shark, the spider, the scorpion, insects, worms, crocodiles, teeth, crushing limbs, a coarse slick oils, wombs, razors, surfaces across and down which we slide, unable to get a handhold, bottomless depths, malevolent eyes, the death rictus, and the symbiotic leer. This man knows what we fear, and he shows it to us again and again. Don't bother me with this terrible beauty nonsense. That's for parvenists, for diddlers. Geiger is working with primal materials, and his mission is to stand our hair on end, to unnerve us. Harlan Ellison. Quote, Geiger's work leaves in its emotional wake the sensory equivalent of biting down on tin foil. Most strongly put, he is our latter-day Hieronymus Bosch, the Dutch fabulist, once again demonic and erotic, exalting the more Baudelarian elements of the dark human psyche and affirming our now almost totally committed embrace with rust, stainless steel, the malevolent servo mechanism, and the inescapability of clockwork destiny. Harlan Ellison. Opposite, Landscape 18 by H.R. Geiger, 1973. Geiger's world is unlike any other. On entering, you are first repelled and then drawn in by its strange beauty. Much of the artist's work has been described as nightmarish, and the artist admits that some of his earlier paintings were done as a way of banishing disturbing dreams. I had a diary, a dream book. I had been having the same dreams again and again, and they were nightmares. They were horrifying, but I found that when I made artwork about them, the dreams went away. I felt much better. It was sort of self-psychiatry. In my dreams, I think I always know where I am, but although these places must exist somewhere, I don't know where. I never think that I really paint horror. When I was a child, I loved the ghost trains and things like that, but I also like castles and old buildings. He refers to his paintings as landscapes or environments, and many of them are produced on large sheets of waterproof paper which have been mounted on chipboard or plywood panels. If I have an idea, then I just make a sketch so I won't forget it, he says. The colors I use are pink and white, so they give the colors something that has been lying a long time in a basement, not very healthy colors. Sometimes people come and see my paintings, and they see only the horrible, terrible things. In my paintings, there are a lot of archetypes. People look at them and feel uncomfortable, and perhaps they think it's me, but it's them. I always have two elements in my paintings, the horrible things and the nice things. I mean, I like elegance. I like Art Nouveau, stretched line or curve. These things are very much in the foreground of my work. My stuff is not completely fresh. I have been influenced by Gaudi, Cuban, Dali, and first and foremost by Hieronymus Bosch. When I do my work, everything influences me. It comes directly into my work. Many of these influences are reflected in his dystopian depictions of worlds sinking beneath ecological horror, overpopulation, and modern warfare. Other representations of our infected planet strike me as sentimental, he says. More often than not, they give us only an imprecise idea of the shape we and our environs are in. Sex and death are all around us. It's so important. All the problems we have are to do with these things. I like to warn people about overpopulation in my work. Every problem comes from that, and it's ridiculous. It's really crazy that this world is so full of people that it's about to explode. The new landscape of horror is the body, its diseases, decay, and secretions. It's a world that Geiger explores with the insight of the other great artists of the horrific, such as Goya and Bacon. Like them, he creates strange places in which eventually we find a home. It is a clear theme that runs through much of Geiger's work, along with claustrophobia and a fascination with babies and reproduction. These are perhaps best defined in his 1973 painting, Landscape 18, produced in acrylic on his paper and wood. Landscapes formed from babies' heads have always given me a particular thrill, admits the artist. Babies are so beautifully innocent, and yet when I see them en masse, a canvas, thank God, has its limits. They become threatening and seem to me to represent the beginning of all evil. When a baby is born, it already has a brain, and that brain is not completely empty. It is aware of the heart beating. That's a reason why I have these strange claustrophobic dreams. I remember when I was a little seed, I was swimming like crazy, and I could see others. I asked my mother about my birth, and she said it was very difficult. It took a long time. I remember that I saw these passages, and at the end I saw something round and like steel. I was probably an instrument the doctor used. Through the paintings, I found out many things about myself. My work is kind of therapy for me. I probably make other people sick, but for me it's healthy. Then we have the interior of Geiger's home, the alien sill and species. And quote, the images Geiger has created have a power that demands closer and more reflective study than the sleek, slick, hyperactive style of modern fantastic cinema allows, Clive Barker. Quote, as long as Hollywood wants to work with me, I am prepared to generate ideas that only American special effects people can do. Perhaps I try too much and put too much stress upon myself. At least I try to extend myself to the limits of my abilities. So here's the inside of his home. And then sill and species. Quote, his paintings had a profound effect on me. I've never seen anything that was quite as horrible and at the same time as beautiful as his work. So I ended up writing a script about a Geiger monster, Dan O'Bannon. Despite his worldwide fame, Geiger remains content to live in Zurich. I'm an artist on the fringe, he maintains. In Zurich, I think I'm alone. Switzerland is not a very fantastic land. I like to stay here. It's very safe. I visited him in his studio, recalls Species director Roger Donaldson. Quite an amazing place. 2 little row houses where he's punched a hole from one into the next one. Walls completely covered with his paintings and drawings, paintings on the ceilings, strange artifacts everywhere, bones and machinery. I remember sitting by a table and thinking, my God, that looks like a shrunken head. And indeed, it was a genuine shrunken head sitting there on the table. Geiger's home was also filled with many bizarre presents that people have given him over the years. It's just like a warehouse, he admits. I could fill a huge hall and I would still never have enough space for my stuff. You can't find a 2-meter square. Every space is taken. I like things like skulls, for instance. When I was 5 years old, I got this skull from the pharmacy. That was something special, having a real skull. I could do what I wanted with this skull. It was my skull. Sometimes people sometimes send me very strange things like an English shrunken head or some magical stuff. Sometimes it is uncomfortable to live with these objects, so I have to give them away. I'm not superstitious about the 13th or something like that, maintains the artist, but I am sometimes superstitious. I have certain feelings that are like warning that something could happen. The world of magic has always held a fascination for me, and this in turn has left its mark on my painting. Perhaps it has also helped me overcome my fears such as forces, a fear so bound up with my fascination, because what you don't know, you're afraid of. That was F for flesh. And a discussion on H.R. Geiger. I like how he included so much information about what Geiger himself felt about his artwork. I found that was incredibly interesting. Because, of course, we all know we've seen so much influenced by his artwork, but I didn't know he felt all those different ways about his artwork, and as well as just in general working in the film industry. There's a lot of pushback in the film industry, and a lot of times people don't talk about that if you're not in the industry itself. But like in particular with Clive Barker, the reason why he stopped making his own films was just because he got tired of constantly fighting with producers. Like, for example, with Nightbreed. Nightbreed is this beautiful, overarching, love story that is a horror film, but it is also just a film about just generally being other than, and it's almost in a way closer to a fantasy, but like people wouldn't buy that, because when people hear fantasy, they're only going to think about like Camelot and knights. They're not going to think of it in a different way, because genres are so ridiculous. And still to this day, in the film industry, genres are very much so like straightforward. I know that everybody is working on trying to make the genres more fluid, but they're not really. Last year, I went to the American film market, and I was sitting in one of the classes, and they were talking about, okay, well, if it's a horror, it has to be scary. But for me personally, the majority of horror doesn't scare me. But I still count things as horror, because horror is such a huge encompassing genre that what's scary to me is going to be, might not be scary to someone else. So it was more about finding your audience and and also representing your projects correctly. But when you're talking about stuff like H.R. Geiger or like Clive Barker, the idea is so big that it's difficult to condense it all down to something that's easily digestible for the modern audience, or for what Hollywood executives want to hear. Sorry, I did not mean to go on a ramble about films, but also, like, I've been watching a lot of film documentaries lately. Sorry. Oh well, the more you know, right? Okay, that was F for Flesh. I'm glad we learned about H.R. Geiger. Next week is G for Grim Tales. I like this little derpy guy. He's cute. I want one. As my dog, screams in the background. I don't know what she's screaming about now. Thank you for reading with me. We will see you next week. Bye.